All right, everybody. Welcome to another live stream with my returning guest, Steve Wright. Steve, thank you so much for being here today. This is a topic that a lot of people have questions on, so I am just thrilled to have you on today.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah. So everyone tuning in, we are going to talk about histamine intolerance, elimination diets, all the things. Yeah, Steve, if you wouldn't mind now, everyone watching, there's a playlist linked in the information section. If you don't know who Steve is, I literally have a playlist now. So you can go back and watch all of the different topics and things we've talked about. But Steve, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself briefly to the audience.
Yeah, so I'm Stephen Wright. I typically call myself a health engineer. I've been a lifelong, uh, like on a lifelong journey basically since birth of trying to correct my gut dysfunctions and various ailments that I've picked up along the way. I completed a degree in electrical engineering and then went on to get functional medicine training with the Kalish Institute and various naturopathic specialty courses on gut dysfunction and SIBO and things like that. And I also just happen to enjoy reading about the newest and latest and greatest as far as molecules and chemicals and compounds and treatments. So I usually read, I've been reading multiple journal articles per week for over 12 years now. So so that's kind of my story of spending my whole life and about $400,000 on Western medicine to Eastern medicine to functional medicine and how we are now today.
Yeah, you have quite an extensive, education background in healing the gut. That's kind of what I wanted to just. You have personal experience, one, just a lifelong, kind of like me, just always the issues with the gut growing up. I had eczema, all the horrible things that just stem out of gut issues, and you really have not only lifelong experience, but you've worked in this field and kind of worked with quite a few people over the years. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. So when I was a digestive consultant, I saw over 350 people one-on-one. And then I've been doing this since 2009 when I switched my diet to the specific carbohydrate diet because I had so much gas and bloating. I was about to get fired basically. And it was like ruining my dating life and all kind of embarrassing stories. And because I started blogging and just writing about my pain and my frustration and my excitement back in 2009, I've interacted with tens of thousands. I mean, actually, maybe it's 100,000 now, people or more personally answering their comments, their questions, exchanging emails about various topics. So I have a lot of pattern recognition, at least, and seen a lot of trends come and go. I've seen a lot of ideas be the in vogue idea of the year, only to find out 2 to 3 years later in the research trials that it didn't work, or it only worked for a certain population. So I have been through the ringer for a while in the digestive world.
Yeah, I just wanted people to know that because when we take advice from someone, I'm very big on this. I really want, number one, for them to have some personal experience, that they have some kind of skin in the game if they've really struggled with that issue. And then also the experience of working one on one with people and listening to people, because it's one thing to read studies and, that's all good. But if you're not working with people and getting feedback from people the way that you are, I'm in your Facebook group, and that's always such a wealth of knowledge in there. And you have so much work. If you like Google Stephen Wright and help the gut, you can find a lot of stuff that you've done, a lot of work that you've done. So I really do appreciate all that you have done.
Yeah, thank you. It is a time we live in a time now where uh, trying to understand how to rank stack the information that's coming
Yeah.
at you is very important, and trying to figure out who to listen to and who to block out. And so I guess I would say that while I have tons of experience, I'm sure I'll say things today that might not be useful for you. Take what you hear and with a grain of salt. Try it. If it doesn't work, let me know. That's actually how I like to operate. I actually
Yeah.
love the feedback, the loops. I don't want to be stuck in a world of research, and I don't want to be stuck in a world of just like doing and just hearing about things. I want to try to be the bridge between both.
I love that. And you do a great job of that. So awesome. Let's go ahead and just jump into, I have a list of questions, guys, that I kind of predetermined before Steve and I sat down today. And if we get through all of them, we'll try to get into some of your questions if you're popping them into the chat live here. I wanted to talk about histamine intolerance. It's the fall. And just on a personal note, I've been using the Healthy Gut products since, I want to say, February of this year. And this fall is the first time that I don't have a runny nose, that I'm not getting Afrin and squirting my nose just so that I can sleep at night. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So I'm like, I've done so much to work on my gut this year, and I've been taking the Healthy Gut products since February. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about this histamine issue, because it's one of the ones that I get messages constantly on my Instagram of people just struggling with histamine intolerance. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind just kind of jumping into your definition of histamine intolerance and what some of the symptoms someone might be having if they're suffering from histamine intolerance.
Yeah, histamine is like all things in the body. And as humans, we really struggle with this paradox, but I really need to like get people to get this, is that we want some, but not too much. We don't want too little. So it's like estrogen. It's actually like testosterone. It's like progesterone. It's like almost every chemical, like even vitamins and minerals. You want enough, not too much, not too little, because too much or too little causes side effects, and the body must compensate to keep us alive. And so histamine is actually very important. It signals the production of stomach acid. It's very important in the brain. It's a very important part of the immune system. However, there's this basically overexpression or over release of histamine that is common in those of us who are struggling with our guts and struggling with our lives, and we're having symptoms like runny nose, like you mentioned. You're having food sensitivities, you're having headaches, maybe even migraines. It can be related to just on like the low end, it can be like fatigue, like general, like nothing makes sense. Why is my brain so foggy? It can go as far as like nausea, general upsetness in the gut. But then it gets worse. Like if it keeps progressing, people consider it called mast cell activation syndrome, where you're basically just shooting histamine out and basically, instead of doing it when you should and not doing it when you shouldn't, like inflammation, you're sort of just spewing histamine out all the time. And then those people end up really struggling, and they can have things like tachycardia, they can have nausea, vomiting all the time. They can have serious brain troubles, like where they're wondering if they have neurodegeneration. I'm probably missing some other issues here. This is not one that I personally struggled with, but it's one that's really prevalent amongst our customers and amongst my friends, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely prevalent with my audience. And so many things that you mentioned I'm just like, oh yeah, I remember dealing with that. And I've had these things, the histamine issues, since I was a young child, and going on the carnivore diet. The first year, I would say everything really calmed down, but then it kind of all came back with a vengeance. And I'm really convinced it's because I didn't really heal my gut. I didn't go deeper to actually heal my gut. And the stomach acid issue, can you talk a little bit about that with the histamine and stomach acid? I know I didn't put that on the list.
Yeah, so histamine is actually part of the release of stomach acid. So you actually need histamine at some level to release stomach acid and do proper digestion. So again, we don't want to suppress it too much. And this is where actually, for those people who have like really extreme histamine issues, like you can really trace it back to their migraines, their tachycardia, their, like I said, their intense fatigue and intense brain fog. They will end up on antihistamines and sometimes proton pump inhibitors or other acid blocking medications, because they're antihistamine in a way. And those give relief, although they disrupt your regularly functioning digestion and can really set you back. And it can end up in this sort of cycle where you can't go off of them, because then you feel so bad you can't even remember where the car keys are, or you have a headache so bad you can't leave the couch, but you also can't really digest your food. So, we want to try to not get there if possible.
Got it. And we talked about this a little on the email, and you said you didn't know if you necessarily had the most scientific answer for this next question. But why do you think that histamine intolerance symptoms seem to flare up worse in the spring and the fall?
Yeah, so here's going to be my answer, and I don't know if people will love this or hate this. Some people I think will love it, and some people will blow it off as not that important. But our environment shapes us so much more than we want to ever admit as a human. We think we're so smart and we're so in control, and we're so in effect of our own outcomes. And yet the truth from science and behavior change literature out of the psychiatric communities and the social sciences communities is that our environment shapes us like most of the time.
Yeah.
And so whenever the environment is changing, like you'll have people who are like, oh, the barometric pressure dropped and now my knees
Mhm.
hurt. I think potentially, obviously, we have pollen generation in the spring and early summer, and then we have degradation of a bunch of vegetal matter in the fall. But also, people turn on their furnaces that have been sitting
Yes.
potentially, and they haven't changed their filters. Maybe they've been living in the same house for 20, 30 years. They've never called the duct guy that come in and pay him $500 and they'll clean all that nasty stuff out of your duct work. Also, people change their eating habits during changes in the seasons unconsciously. They're like, oh, pumpkin, I love pumpkin. Personally, I love pumpkin, but maybe pumpkin's not good for you. Or maybe, you get into these changes of season and you want more red wine. Well, red wine has a lot
Mhm.
more
Oh,
histamines than
yeah.
white wine. So that's generally what I was thinking when it comes to people reporting that they have changes in their histamine. But what were you going to say?
Very similar. I mean, extremely similar. I live here in Georgia, and mine always would usually flare up during springtime because everything here turns yellow. We have a ridiculous amount of pollen, and it's just like yellow cars. Everything's yellow for a few weeks here. And then in the fall, same. Yeah. I mean, we just actually spent money to have our ducts clean. There's a company here called Zero Res, not affiliated with them in any way, but they clean, your couches, and they clean upholstery, and they can clean your ducts out, and they don't use any chemicals. And so that's why, yeah, we do that every spring and every fall. But the grass gets me every year. So I feel like there's the histamine bucket, we talk about, and your body can only deal with so much. So if you're already kind of reactive to some of the things that are low lying in your environment, perhaps you have food sensitivities, and then the bucket gets fuller and fuller and fuller, and then boom, outside we've got like grass and things, going on, mold outside that from the wet leaves. Yeah, then your histamine bucket gets full, and it's like this full on explosion, and you're just miserable. But yeah, I was basically going to just say exactly what you said.
Okay. Yeah, and you mentioned something really important too, is that typically most places that you might be living right now, winter and summer are lower moisture times actually.
Yep.
But spring and fall, typically there's more moisture just hanging around or coming down. Whereas in winter it's kind of frozen, and then in summer it's pretty dry. So, moisture does impact mold and a lot of other things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's just jump into the next question of how we talked about this a little bit, but how is the gut connected to histamine intolerance?
So a lot of your mast cells are located in the lining of the gut. So they're sort of like side by side with other types of cells. And then, we've heard this term many, many times, but like I like to think of it as like almost like you have like a circular tube going through your body. That's your gut. And then there's like a lining around that. I can't draw backwards on the computer here, but with my finger. But there's a tube inside of a tube, and around that is your immune system, or at least 70 to 80% of it. And like it's kind of mind blowing to think that like it's not up here, it's not here, it's not on all these extremities. It's like in the center of your body, around your tubing is another set of tubes, or a space, anyways, that is where most of your immune system is. And so when we think about histamines, we think about where are the mast cells, where's the histamine being released, and then where is that taking effect? And a lot of it's taking effect on your immune system, on sort of like triggering the Th2 part of the immune system, and sort of like just doing various jobs. And so why we want the gut barrier to be as strong as possible, the mucus barrier and then the microbiome barrier as strong as possible, is because that keeps those mast cells away from the foreign matter inside of our guts, because it should only receive a little bit of information. It shouldn't be just like blasted on the front lines of digestion. It should be, it should have to go through microbiome layer and then 2 layers of mucus, and then the mast cells should be doing their jobs. And so when that happens, we have a proper release, because sometimes you do need to release histamine to signal, hey, like there's something bad going on over here. Like bring the cavalry and let's attack this food particle or this allergen or this microbe of some type.
So just like we demonize cortisol, but it's actually useful in the body for cutting inflammation, correct?
100%. Yeah. Too low a cortisol, like this whole idea that we have to like suppress all of our cortisol is terrible.
Yeah,
especially in autoimmunity and people who've been chronically ill for a long time. What I've seen over and over is they have low cortisol.
Yes.
And so meanwhile, they're chugging supplements, trying to lower their cortisol, because that's what everybody says you need to do if you have adrenal fatigue. And that's just flat wrong. You can fall on either side of the spectrum depending on how long you've been sick and where your body's at. And so the same is true for histamine and mast cells. But what we know is that there's a system of like layers of how the gut is arranged and how it should function. And having, like I said, a strong microbiome, strong mucus layers, those lead to a strong gut lining, so you don't have leaky gut. And then that all protects the mast cells from being overactivated.
Okay.
And then short chain, and the reason why the microbiome matters is because of the short chain fatty acid production that they do.
To make the butyrate, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. So how could something because like I said in the very beginning, I've been taking the healthy gut products since February of this year. How could, taking HCl before meals, enzymes midway through, and then possibly I do the postbiotic, the butyrate supplement after, but how could those things kind of support my body and my gut in so that I don't have histamine issues right now, which is a miracle. How is that happening?
It's all a system, right? So it was designed as a system. It was designed to work in concert. And so in the stomach, in the HCl guard you're taking, if you have proper stomach acid, you're going to be sort of neutralizing any incoming microbes or allergens potentially that need to be like basically killed by acid. So that's one step, is to maybe neutralize a little bit more of the incoming offending particles, if you will, with the right stomach acid. On top of that, many of the types of molecules that your body reacts to are protein fragments or just protein remnants. And so stomach acid and the process of unfolding proteins and beginning to cut them up by the pepsin in the stomach is one of the most underrated and important steps in getting proper protein breakdown into amino acids, into like basically sizes and structures that your body recognizes and can deal with. Because if it's the wrong shape or the wrong size, your body's going to see it as a foreign invader, even if it's grass-fed beef.
Yes.
And so proper stomach acid is really important. The HCl guard also has ginger and DGL in it, which are 2 herbs that are help with histamine intolerance and sort of help regulate histamine release. So that's what's happening there. In the small intestine with enzymes, whether it's holozymes or another enzyme from a different company, again, we're trying to do 2 things with those. One is we want to break up the food particles into sizes, like fully digest them, fully break them down so your body can absorb them and they're in the right size for your body. So it doesn't react to it and say like, oh, that wild caught salmon's not the right chunk size. So now we have to go, kill that bad thing. But the other thing is that we need to break the food down and get it ready for your microbiome to process it into butyrates and short chain fatty acids, and make sure that, there's other bugs like SIBOs and SIVOs and things like that that aren't able to like gobble up the food. So that's sort of what's happening with the whole enzyme. And the tributylin X or the butyrates are like inherently anti-histamine. They soothe the mast cells. It is a growing theory. It's not completely fact yet, but there's several papers suggesting that essentially loss of butyrate equals high histamine. Like that's
Ah,
like basically what you can count on, because the butyrate, one of the things that it does, other than basically create the right microbiome, and then the right microbiome creates more butyrate, is that it regulates something called T helper cells. And
mm.
T helper cells are sort of like the referees amongst a lot of the immune cells. They sort of say, oh, no, 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 we have too many of you. You're inflaming the gut. We need more of this other thing. Let's balance it. And so there's two sides of your immune system, Th1 and Th2. And I get them a little confused on what exactly they all do all the time, because there's so many. I think the immune system is so complex. It's amazing.
Very much so.
Um, but essentially, if you want an immune system that's balanced and
Mhm.
it can move back and forth. It's flexible if you want, just like you want a flexible brain. You want to be able to deal with high states and you want to deal with low states. And the same is true with your immune system. T helper cells and T reg cells are part of what butyrate produces and generates, and both of those help keep that balance. And then on top of that, they also are very important. Butyrates are very important for the mucosal
Mhm.
layers I was talking about. It upregulates the MUC2 gene, which produces more mucus. And if you have low cortisol, you're pretty much going to have low mucus. If you've had all kinds of hormone disruption, low estrogens, things like that, it's common to have pretty messed up mucosal layers as well. So the mucus pathways are often, underlooked as well, because they're kind of like gross to talk about, I think,
Yeah.
for some people. And they're weird to think that like almost all of our insides have this mucousy membrane that helps protect everything from everything else. They're sort of like the boundaries, if you will. And so if
Yeah.
the boundaries go away, it's just like an abusive relationship with a human. We need our boundaries. And so that's where the butyrates and tributylin X comes into play.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I always talk about my daughter on here. She, when she gets stung by mosquitoes, which we have a lot of here in Georgia, and she loves to be in the yard. She'll just stay in the yard all afternoon, which I'm happy with. But she gets these giant welts on her body when she gets stung by mosquitoes. So I started giving her the Tributin earlier this summer. I give her enzymes and I give her the butyrate supplement. And I just noticed it was last night. We still have the mosquitoes here, even in October. We're blessed with 80 degrees here, and they're not all dead yet. And she had gotten bitten, and I noticed the welt was just like a normal size. And a lot of people don't know that is, and she has histamine. She's my child, so she obviously has the histamine issue. So yeah, I was just thrilled to see that that's like an actual real change with her, because she's non-speaking, and so a lot of times when she is having a histamine reaction, I don't know. I just know that she's having behaviors and she's hitting her head and she's very upset. But that was something I could just see last night of like, wow, she just got bit by a mosquito because they love her, and she didn't get this huge welt on her body, and that's a direct uh, correlation with the histamine. So I think that butyrate is pretty overlooked when it comes to healing histamine and the immune system.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to call it the magnesium of the gut. I'm trying to rebrand it because
Ah, I
people
like
don't
that.
understand it.
Yeah.
And the thought there is that magnesium's used everywhere in the body. It's like everywhere we check, magnesium's important for like over 300 reactions in the body. Well, everywhere we check for butyrate, it's very important as well, both in the gut and then systemically, whether it's in the lungs, the brain, the bones, the liver, everywhere. And then of course the immune system for sure. And so yeah, as I was saying, we'll see if this plays out, but there's several researchers now that are pushing a solid hypothesis that loss of butyrate and low butyrate equals basically leaky gut, immune
Mhm.
system dysregulation, and histamine problems. And
Yeah.
without it, you're never going to get that back.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting to watch. I'm always looking at the papers, and you do such a great job on your newsletter on the Healthy Gut website of, putting out the research once you see it with these types of things. And so people are asking about, we did a whole lot. I think the last live stream we did was a lot about butyrate, right? It was like, so if you guys are asking more about butyrate, we can talk a little bit about it since we're in the topic. But if you want a whole live stream where we really dive into butyrate and how the gut makes it and all of that, it's on the playlist, and it's the one we did about fiber. Because that, my audience is primarily carnivore, and if you look at a lot of stuff, they say you have to have a lot of fiber to make butyrate. So would you just briefly touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's important to always remember that in general, the body has backup systems for its systems. So, the way that the Navy SEALs and like the highest teams of teams out there that they operate, they say 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And that's a saying to remember, that to have a backup. And so the body often has backups, but oftentimes the backups are inefficient or lack certain things. And so it does appear that not all butyrate production is lost when you lose all your fiber intake and all of your prebiotic intake. There's other derivatives like isobutyrate and other short chain fatty acids. There's also some ketone bodies that seem to step in and try to replace for the lost butyrate. And so I no one knows yet, including myself, about like what happens long term when you have these sort of secondary players trying to do the job when the job was supposed to be done by the butyrate.
Mm.
And so and so in case you're wondering, why do vegetables matter? Well, they have a lot of nutrients, but one of the most important things they have to do for this conversation is that their fermentable fiber matter is what is turned into butyrate. And so there's certain species of your microbiome, only certain ones, that make butyrate, and there's certain species that break down vegetable fiber, and then they pass those metabolites to the butyrate producers. The butyrate producers produce the butyrate, and then 95% of your colon cell metabolism is through butyrate. 5% goes systemic throughout the body to all those other places I was talking about. The question that no one has the answer for yet is, can ketone bodies or isobutyrate or some of these other derivatives fulfill the colon site's energy needs? And do they regulate histamine production, or do they regulate tight junction production in the blood-brain barrier, or do they regulate the lungs? Do they regulate bone mass and bone loss the same way that butyrate does? Normally the answer is no, long term. So I'm highly skeptical that doing carnivore more than a year, and sometimes even more than 6 months, is really that good for long-term health. And if you had enough damage to your health, if you had enough problems that carnivore totally changed your life, maybe there's been so much damage you've accumulated during your lifetime that you will need to be on a carnivore or mostly carnivore the rest of your life. So I'm not saying it's not a tool forever, but I am saying that you're probably going to want some supplemental butyrate if you're on carnivore, number one. Number two, there's consequences over time of microbiome shifts and loss of microbiome that may be really hard to get back for this butyrate if you ever try to introduce fiber from vegetable matter again.
And what about just eating butter? Because I know it's like the Latin root for butyrate is butter, and I know we talked about this on the live stream that we did, but there's a lot of people that tout, if you just eat butter, then that's going to be enough butyrate. Your body will make enough butyrate. And I don't know. Can we talk about that just a little bit? Yeah, I don't think so either.
The answer is no. You can do all these mathematical, theoretical calculations about if butter has 3% butyric acid, and then you're able to eat 3 pounds of butter a day or 2 pounds of butter a day, or whatever the number is for your body weight and size, that somehow you're replacing your butyrate. Number one, a lot of that's going to be destroyed in the stomach and the upper small intestine. So I'm just going to go ahead and say no. There's nothing that says that we're actually harvesting butyric acid from butter at this point. And I would challenge anyone to do like a Tributyrin X versus butter challenge. So, I'll give you a refund if it proves butter works, and you can let's talk about it. Cause I'm just, I'm learning just as everybody else is learning, but like eat your 2 pounds of butter a day for a week, and then take 1 pill of Tributyrin X or 2 pills of Tributyrin X a day for a week. And then, we can try to measure, butyrate via stools is pretty inaccurate, but I think your symptoms and how you feel will probably tell you which feels better.
Yeah, and I'm kind of I did super high fat carnivore for a long while. I was in very deep ketosis. I mean, every time I look up my Facebook memories or my phone memories, I will see these really crazy high ketones and low blood sugar. Like, I did the deal with carnivore, and I was eating, the main fat source for me was butter. And so I don't think I was eating 2 pounds of butter a day, but I could easily go through 2 sticks of butter a day, easily. And I still struggled very much with the histamine issues. And so I've kind of done my own Tribune X versus butter experiment, just anecdotally here. And I'll tell you, just taking the butyrate supplement is a lot easier. And yeah, and I've lost weight too. So it definitely was harder to maintain my weight when I was eating a couple sticks of butter a day and just a little bit of meat. So yeah, just anecdotally, that, little butyrate versus butter study, I've done that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not anti-carnivore. I'm not anti-butter. I'm not anti-ketosis. I'm just anti people sort of believing some dogma or seeing a change from a certain dietary change. Because this happened to me. It's happened to so many people I interact with.
Mhm.
I don't care if you go paleo, carnivore. This is not probably allowed on the show, but vegan. But the same problem shows up, which is that you get better during the elimination phase
Yeah.
of the first 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks, and then you start to crash. But you felt so much better that you hold on to this belief that this diet is still important for you or needed for you. Meanwhile, all evidence that's to the contrary. Your lab markers are getting worse. Your symptomology is getting worse. And if you're not tracking it with a doctor, a therapist, a partner who's living with you, our confirmation bias and our capacity to block out bad stuff as a human will people will die on hills they didn't need to die on, because the answer was that it's okay to change your diet again. It's okay to
Yeah.
change. It's okay that one thing worked and then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's just part of the healing journey.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been my journey this year, because I just have been on this kind of mission to heal my gut. And I've dropped the dogma of having to be, quote unquote, strict carnivore. I still am mostly carnivore, but I can tolerate a lot of different foods now that I never could before. I was strict carnivore because I couldn't tolerate anything. And now I can tolerate all kinds of things, and mostly meat again, and, use my local farm here and eat what comes from the farm. And we're getting ready to hit winter. And so, yeah, a lot of what I get from the farm is going to be meat and fat and butter and eggs. And I'm fine with that. I could do that. But I think the problem that comes with these is that people, again, they're just stuck. And when things start to happen for them, like for me, the histamine intolerance about a year in got really bad, but I was kind of sold into this diet and this label. And so it took me a while before I actually started saying, I need to be looking at healing my gut. I need to look at some things a little bit deeper, instead of trying to just fall into a diet camp. And I think that's where people really get hurt. And that's why I've continued to put out information, because I want people to know, like, it's okay if you if you want to change what you're eating. It's like literally the least interesting thing about you. And it doesn't make you who you are.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger curve or
Yes.
effect, and it's worthwhile to just look up and just think about it. And I try to think about it all the time in my life, whether I'm looking at the current pandemic, whether I'm looking at science, whether I'm looking at politics, whatever it is. Whenever I get highly emotional about something, I often find that I'm at the top of the curve where I'm very evangelical about something, only to find out weeks, months, or years later that the more I know, the less I know. And so
Yes.
I think that's where I am right now with diets myself. If someone's watching this right now and you're like, I love carnivore, I'm doing so good, and I was hoping to tune in today to just feel more good about what you're doing, like, I just want to say, go get them. Like, stay
Yeah.
there. You're in the right spot. And if you're tuning in today and you're farther down your healing path and you're farther down the Dunning Kruger curve, just know that change is coming, and that's good too. And we're all learning together.
Yes, thank you for that, and I couldn't agree more. It's we just want to keep an open mind about things, and I want people, because I know I'll get comments like, "I'm doing carnivore, it's working great for me." Then I'm like, "Keep going. As long as it's going well for you and you're feeling good, then keep doing what you're doing." But if things change, then be open-minded to look into other things, because it's your health, and it doesn't really, at the end of the day, matter about some club that you belong to of being carnivore or keto or paleo or vegan or whatever. It does not matter. you know
Yeah, I think we all want, at least I think everybody in this community and everybody on this show just wants everybody to feel as good as they can feel. And
Yeah.
if the best for you is all vegetable or all meat, then perfect. I am not going to judge that. But if you come to me and you say, I have these other issues going on, I can't sleep, I don't have any memory, I don't have any energy, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm having bowel disruptions, I have this weird rash that shows up, I can't
Yeah.
be around dogs or cats because I have these things, I have asthma. Like, if you have these things that are commonly accepted as normal in our society, my blood sugar is dysregulated, I'm going to say, well, maybe there's more digging to do, and
Yep.
maybe, doing some functional medicine or integrative testing is the next step for you. Or maybe some, like playing with some high end supplements that can really make some changes is the next step for you. So I'm not here to disrupt anybody who's having a great time and
Yeah.
feeling great, but I am here to disrupt those who are stuck on protocols or ideas that they're wishing they felt a different way, and they're bound to these other ideas.
Agree. Totally agree. And someone, I guess, had a question about probiotics, which I know I didn't even bring up, but how is a probiotic maybe different or could be helpful when someone's dealing with histamine intolerance?
This is a really gray area, even for
Yeah.
myself and for many, histamine specialists, like which I count as some of my good friends. They spend every day thinking about histamine. Um, Probiotics are, typically a live bacteria unless they're dead, which is called a paraprobiotic, which we'll hear a lot more about in the coming years. But basically, probiotics are multifactorial in that they exert all kind of influences. They exert influences on the microbiome. Most of the influences are probably on the immune system, and probably, um, that immune system is highly regulated or highly involved with the histamine release. And so, which probiotics may dampen the histamine release or over encourage more overexpression, or which way does the microbiome need to shift so you're more in regulation? That all that's all up for debate right now. And
Yeah.
there's people that are say like, oh, well, these species make histamine, so don't take those. That maybe that works. I don't, it's not clear to me that there's enough data in the research, and there's not enough on the boots on the ground research to say like, oh, you should take a antihistamine species or something like that. I don't see that being a really good use of your money and time at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I have had people have mixed results using probiotics to help with histamine. I think that structurally, we have to look structurally first, right? Like, are we making enough stomach acid? Are we breaking down our food? Do we have enough butyrate in the body before we start throwing in strains of bacteria? That's kind of my thinking and just what I've seen for myself and then for people that I've worked with also, right?
Yeah, I think personally, if you want my hot take on where this is going, is that probiotics and their heat killed derivatives, paraprobiotics, are going to begin to get highly specific. So
Hmm.
it'll be like this amount, like 10 billion CFU of this specific strain, not just Lactobacillus rhamnosus, but Lactobacillus rhamnosus HN019. That one is for your brain, and this other one's for your eye, and this
Yeah.
other one's for your lungs, and because they actually give off other chemicals and other metabolites that I'm not even sure we're able to measure all of them at this point. And so there's going to be anxiety formulas and depression formulas and asthma formulas, and maybe there will be a histamine formula,
Yeah.
coming, but I haven't seen the research yet on that. So I think probiotics are going to be more of these targeted
Yeah.
use cases. And I take probiotics. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
probiotics are bad. I just think that a lot has been put on them, like they're like the savior
Yeah.
of your gut or of your histamine. And I think that's not, it's a false flag. It's not, it just in practice hasn't really worked out that way.
Yeah, and they have so I use this. I've actually at the box. I use Thrive, and it takes a sample of your microbiome, and then it will offer you a probiotic based on your own sample. And so, I've seen people that usually react terribly to probiotics do the custom probiotics and just love them. And so I feel like going more custom with your probiotics is definitely the way that it's going, but you have to address, like I said, the structural issues first, because even throwing in bacteria, if you don't have enough stomach acid or you're not breaking your food down, is only going to get you so far, I think. Yeah. I had questions about an elimination diet, and somebody had a question about fasting. I feel like fasting and elimination diet, we could almost talk about on the same wavelength, as far as helping with histamine intolerance. What are your thoughts with that?
Look, as a person who's struggled, been in a lot of pain in my life, and then as a consultant for people with their health for a little while, my focus always was to get someone out of their acute pain.
Yeah.
So like like I said, if you're having migraines every day, if you're having like your joints hurt so bad you can hardly walk, or whatever it might be, you can't think because your brain's so foggy. Like my goal is always to bring in change whatever you can with your diet. So that might be water fast, that might be an elimination diet, and then bring in powerful supplements and even pharmaceutical drugs, where your doctor says it makes sense, to basically, intervene and bring your level of health up so you can be a functioning human and make better decisions and figure out what's actually going on. And so I think water fasting is a really smart idea, especially, once a month or once a quarter. I think there's a lot of benefit there. So I'm a huge fan of that. I don't buy in. I'm more of a fan of the fasting where you don't consume calories,
Yeah.
not the kind where you consume all kinds of fat or amino acids or something like that. I mean, those can be helpful for other reasons, but I like the research on just stopping all digestion basically and just consuming like tea and water, or maybe a little coffee or something, whatever you're up to. The elimination diets, again, changed my life and changed a lot of people's life, but the research suggests around week 6 to week 12 is when you really start to lose your microbiome species. You start to lose your butyrate production. This is when you go low FODMAP. I'm sure if they do the studies on carnivore, it's at least that fast, maybe faster, because low FODMAP is low on a lot of high fermentable fiber vegetables, but still includes vegetables. And so, I think you just have to weigh that and maybe put in guardrails for yourself on how do you keep your microbiome healthy during that phase if you're going to continue farther than say 12 weeks.
Yeah. What would you recommend for guardrails for someone doing that?
I mean, I would recommend, Tributylin X as a guardrail. I would, I guess taking a fiber supplement or a prebiotic supplement would be against certain diets, like a carnivore cleanse or something like that. So I would maybe skip those. If you do tolerate a probiotic, like a certain brand, I would keep taking that for sure. I wouldn't necessarily do that on a 3 or 5 day water fast or something like that. I would stop everything during that time period, except for electrolytes. Yeah, I guess I would think about that stuff for now. Nothing else really comes to my mind as far as a gut guardrail. I mean, if you have low stomach acid, please take your HCl, whether it's our product or someone else's.
Yeah, definitely. And that was helpful for me just doing carnivore because I wasn't breaking down the protein. I was eating it and I wasn't breaking it down, and it was still causing issues for me where I was tired and I had dysregulated blood sugar. And yeah, it's so I definitely recommend that if you're doing these, elimination diets or a lot of protein and you're just still not really getting better, you likely have low stomach acid, and that kind of starts to decline for people after the age of 35. And for some people that have were like me and put on antibiotics as a child all the time because of ear infections and all kinds of strep throat and things, then it's going to decline quicker than that, right?
Yeah, there's a number of factors that could cause its lack of release or decline of release. Chief of which is being in sympathetic dominant nervous system all the time, which is our Western cultures. It's what
Yeah.
I do all the time. I'm
Yeah.
I'm just as guilty as everybody else. That's why I try to do my gratitude list and I try to meditate and I try to get to the neurofeedback practitioners. Um, but yeah, there's you could be low zinc, low B12. You can have histamine release issues. We talked about that earlier. You can have H. pylori infections. You could just be older and have a harder time making it. So there's a lot of factors that go into loss of stomach acid production.
Yeah, I love that. And, just to go back to the fasting, I agree. I think it's wonderful. There's a lot of research on fasting to heal your gut, but you definitely want to do water fast with electrolytes if that's what you're really looking for. You don't want to do like a fat fast or MCT oil or those kinds of things. And those can be really helpful to just do. What is it? I think it's like a 24-hour fast will kind of reset the gut. Is that what you've read?
It's so individual. Like if we're
Yeah.
talking about somebody who's on the verge of needing to do a biologic drug because they're having such digestive issues, like they might need a 3 day or
Oh, yeah.
5 day fast.
72. Yeah.
If someone's just like been on just getting back from vacation with the kids and they were just on a little bit of a hot dog and alcohol bender or something, maybe just 24 to 36 hours of just like just let it rest, can do the trick.
Yeah, so individual. I mean, I have a client who unfortunately she did a 72-hour fast and it wasn't enough for her, and her doctor still said you're just so flared up with your colitis that I think you need some steroids. And referred her out to my functional practitioner friend and said, before you do that, talk with her first and see what she says. But at the end of the day, even a 72-hour fast, um, she did end up having to do steroids for short term because the flare was just so bad. So I feel like, we don't want to go straight to the medicine. Like we don't want to go straight there, but using things like going to the doctor and possibly doing things after we've tried other things, I think there's no shame in that at all.
No, no, none. And there's a lot of people that should be probably on replacement cortisol. People that have been
Yeah.
fighting adrenal fatigue their whole lives. They tried 7 different diets before they're on carnivore. They felt a little better on carnivore. Now they're stuck on carnivore, and you've been dealing with this stuff, maybe 10, 20 years. Like you're probably actually need replacement cortisol and maybe a replacement thyroid. So there's nothing wrong with replacing hormones. There's nothing wrong with LDN and
Yeah.
even, rounds of antibiotics if your life's on the line, or rounds of prednisone if your life's on the line. Let's not be, again, let's look at the risk and make sure we're using an intervention uh, that's appropriate to the risk factor here. If the risk factor is death, then antibiotics are a great option. Um, if the
Yeah.
risk factor is like bloating and farting, maybe just go carnivore for a little while and take some supplements. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, so ideally if someone was, wanting to go on an elimination diet, you think probably 12 weeks is good enough for them to do that. They don't necessarily need to be staying on that long term.
I mean, I think it depends on the type of elimination in the person, but in
Mhm.
general, I typically try to get people to start slowly bringing foods back in after 30 days. So let's say you go full carnivore for just the sake of this. And let's say I mean, at this point, I have no idea what you're dealing with. I don't know if you're just a regular human who's never had any diagnoses, or if you're someone who has like 7 diagnoses and you're really battling right now. But regardless, I would, at the 30-day mark, I would probably think of the next thing that is most in line with your value system at the time. So in this case, maybe that's, you might have to help me here, Sarah, but maybe eggs or something.
Oh yeah.
And so maybe you start to bring dairy back in, or not even dairy. You start with eggs for like a week or two. And then slowly after that, you start to bring dairy back in for a week or two. And you start with ghee, and then you go butter, and then you go maybe some fermented, raw milk, or maybe just raw milk, or yogurt, maybe some like specially fermented yogurts. So build what I call your food safe zone. Basically go, bring it really tight and feel that like detox process, and then start adding to it as at the 30-day mark, and go slow. It's not like day 30, I'm saying like order a pizza. I'm saying like go one food group at a time, and just, learn about it, learn about how your body reacts to it, learn about what's going on. And you may find, as most people will find, there's one or two of those food groups that are like really, really difficult for your body right now. And for a lot of people, that could be, for instance, eggs. Like you could try this idea, and like eggs just immediately swell you shut. They fog you up, something like that. You try them again, like 3 times, and you're like, nope, eggs are out. So then switch to another thing, and you might find that like, oh, dairy's not a big deal. Yeah. And then you might try like, I don't know, nuts, almonds or something, and walnuts, and be like, oh, those aren't an issue. And then you try a cashew, and you go crazy. And you're oh, cashews are legumes. They're not nuts. Oh, legumes might be a problem for me. And then you can kind of find out that you have like these little pockets that like eggs and say legumes that right now your body cannot process, but maybe vegetables and, eggs and dairy and meat works really well for you. And so then you have to start to ask the question, what are the prerequisites to be able to handle eggs? Because almost everybody should be able to handle an egg. Yeah. What's the prerequisite to handle a legume? Well, over 50% of the world eats legumes like every day. So it's not that legumes are bad. And so that's when you start to ask the questions about what's specific about these foods and about a gut and an immune system that can't process these. And then that's where the functional medicine practitioner, the integrative medicine practitioner, can really start to unwind, what's holding you back from having full range to eat what you want when you want.
Yeah. And typically it's just different for everyone, but what would you say the most common thing that someone couldn't handle, like cashews or legumes, that you would see with a person that's having an issue with those things?
It's so
individual.
Foods do fall on what I would call like a reactivity or inflammatory index, right?
Yeah.
So you could say that one of the reasons why carnivore is so popular right now and works so well for a lot of people is like it's really low on potential inflammatory effects. Its ability to trigger the immune system or trigger the histamine or something like that is like super low. I think there's like the big 8 or the big 9 food allergens published by, it might be the NIH or somebody, I don't know. But anything on that list, that's like peanuts, shellfish. I think there's some other legumes. I don't even know, but there's other things like dairy has these things called casomorphin. So it's not typically the lactose in dairy. It's typically the casein protein or the whey protein that sort of is triggering you. In eggs, there's proteins in the egg white that can really trigger people. Legumes have lectins and other parts of them. I think they have some phytates as well. Obviously grains would be my last option for you to introduce. I don't know if that needs to be said on this show, but that should, that should be the last option, I would say. But starchy tubers, you'd be shocked. Actually, Rob Wolf did a great job in his, one of his more recent books, the Orange Book. I can't think of the title, but it's got an orange cover, where he basically shows that like humans process starch very differently based on the machinery and the microbiome and the epigenetics they have. And so some people do really, really well on white rice, standard cooked white rice, and do terrible on sweet potatoes. Yeah. And some people do great on white potatoes and they do terrible on white rice. And so, if you have a blood glucometer, on your arm and you can track that, or you can prick your finger,
Hmm.
there's a lot of signs about what you can eat, what you can't eat for your body. But I think we don't necessarily appreciate how individual the food reactions can be.
Yep, I agree. And Hannah in the chat here, she's saying it's the dose that she can eat up to 3 ounces of cheese, but if she does more, she has negative effects, and the same thing with vegetables. And I think that that's kind of maybe that histamine bucket, or just like your body's level of capability to deal with those things. Would you kind of second that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, especially if she did a test where she ate the same cheese, not a different cheese, and she ate the same cheese 2 days in a row at the same amount, like 2.5 ounces, 2.5 ounces, and then if she eats 4 or 4.5 ounces and she just totally reacts, then we know it wasn't the microbiome, it wasn't the immune system. Like, you literally have a something going on where you just cannot handle more of that, which is not typical for a human body. It should be able to handle more of that after several days in a row of getting the same food. And so that's where I would look at an enzyme issue, a
Yep.
butyrate issue, something's happening there. And the same's true for like broccoli, or like, that's the other
Hmm.
thing. When people reintroduce foods, they get all I guess they're just not aware. They don't bring awareness to it. And so
Yeah.
they're like, great, I'm going to try asparagus today. And they make like a pound of asparagus and they
Yeah.
eat like half of it. And they're like, I felt terrible. And I'm like, well, you haven't had asparagus in 6 months. Maybe just start with like 2 stalks. And then tomorrow eat the leftovers and have like 4 or 5 stalks. And, just let because that's going to change your microbiome. Just introducing that
Yeah.
one new product at a certain dosage changes your microbiome.
Yeah, it does. And I know when I try a new food, I always take my enzymes with that food. Um, Always. And I love cheese. I used to not be able to tolerate cheese at all. And I was doing carnivore, and it was like, I want to eat the cheese, but I can eat tons of cheese now and I'm fine with it. I went to a pizza restaurant with my husband a week ago, and everyone thought I was nuts because I just kind of picked the toppings off the pizza and left the crust. And that's what I ate. And I took some of the, cheese and the meats out of the calzone and ate that. And I was happy. But I brought my enzymes with me and took that with that meal. And I was like, if I had tried to do that a year ago, I would have been a complete disaster. But I felt great. I felt fine. So those enzymes help. And then since I've been reintroducing foods, if I go overboard, like you were just talking about, the enzymes always help me. I take them systematically. I'll take them before bed or in the morning on an empty stomach, and my gut just totally chills out a lot quicker than it ever did before. So I'm a big believer in the enzymes for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't encourage this, but like, look, I'm a human and I have emotions. A lot of them, actually, maybe more than my wife, according to her. And so I'm an emotional eater. I soothe through food. I love food. I love flavors. And, I've had a very adversarial relationship with food for much of my life. But
Mhm.
I do know that if I get myself into a bind because it's been a hard week or a hard day, or I'm just being irresponsible at the pizza place, that taking more enzymes, after I know that I'm like, oh, I've overstepped this, it does help systemically. You can help clear things up faster that way.
Yeah, that's what and we've talked about that on other streams before. And you guys that are wanting to know where the enzymes are, they're in the information section. I'll do a pinned comment after we get off the live stream. But yeah, they're great for just clearing up systematic issues if you do have an emotional eating moment, which I know a lot of people do. Um, awesome. Well, any, I guess, kind of closing thoughts in this whole histamine gut elimination diet topic?
Well, I think the one thing is that, like, a lot of the normal histamine uh, supplements that someone would take to mediate histamine release or to help regulate it are probably not allowed or encouraged in the carnivore community, such as like high dose quercetin or something like that, which
Mm,
would be like an herb or a vegetable. So I think going carnivore, if you're having these histamine issues, if you're struggling to reintroduce foods, Tributyrin X is a wonderful option for you. I don't believe it's going to violate any of the
no.
values and beliefs you have around food and the diet. And also, I have honestly never seen. I mean, this is obviously, you have to run this through your own uh, belief system, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen something this fast help histamine intolerant people
Yeah.
who are literally already on high dose quercetin and nettles, and even some
DAO and
pharmaceutical drugs that are histamine blocking drugs, or they're using Benadryl every day or Claritin every day. I've never seen anything faster help somebody like you or them than Tributyrin X. So don't get this wrong that HCl guard or Holozymes or even someone else's enzymes or someone else's HCl is going to be the answer for your specific histamine issues. If that's what you're dealing with, you need to focus on butyrate.
mm,
And if you're not going to use or if you're not going to use Tributyrin X from us, you have to stick with the Tributyrin product that's liquid, not the powdered kinds.
ah,
And so the only other one that I'm aware of is Pure Encapsulations, makes like a liposomal Tributyrin, and so that would
okay.
be the other product, and that's a great product potentially for people who struggle to swallow, even though ours are only little
Yeah,
gel
yours are
caps.
teeny tiny little caps. Yeah. And my daughter, my autistic child can swallow them just fine. So awesome. Well, cool. This has been super, super helpful. And everyone watching, go back and watch the beginning if you missed it. There's a playlist linked in the information section that have all of Steve and I's talks. If you're interested in hearing more from him, I'm sure he'll be back again at some point on the channel. And all the products we talked about are linked in the information section. So thank you, Steve, so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Awesome. All right, guys, we'll see you next time.